Okay, we will continue on with looking at Octavian, aka Augustus, and look today at the unique form of government that he crafted, which would be really the beginning of the empire, called the Principate. So Octavian would rule as dictator, but in a much more subtle way than his adopted father. As we said before, Augustus remained a political enigma, and his special skill lie in wearing a carefully constructed political mask, which was purposefully ambitious. The mask that he wore would be the mask of a benevolent father. In reality, he would be a dictator, but a benevolent dictator. So Octavian was a political realist and a survivor. He would completely transform the Roman constitution from a republic into an empire. The question is, why would he be successful when his great uncle Caesar was not? He soothed Roman fears about one-man rule because these reforms were traditionalist in appearance and had the mask, the facade of being a republic. So in essence, he would reconcile one-man rule with the traditions of the republic. He actually increased the authority of the Senate, at least on paper, and ruled through the title of Augustus, which meant something like a title, an honorific title that meant respect and had an almost religious connotation to it. So one reason for Augustus's long success was his modest public image and ruling as princeps. This is where we get the term principate from. So he cultivated a modest public image. He preferred to rule as princeps, meaning first citizen of the republic. The title that he preferred was princeps, meaning first citizen. But this masked his status as lifelong dictator. So although he had absolute power, he cultivated an image of being good and benevolent pater patria, and apparently treated Rome's unwritten constitution with respect. His long reign, he lives to be 76 years, would bring peace and security and justice back to Rome and cut the corruption and constant bloodshed that had marked the revolution and the civil wars. So after Octavian defeated Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium, once he had ended the civil wars, he reestablished the republic. He did not follow the precedent of Sulla to give up power and retire to the countryside. Instead, it was Augustus's aim to maintain power for life, but in a more subtle fashion. And for this, he needed a new political formula, which would be that of the Principate. He was determined to maintain his divine father Caesar's position of authority, but he was determined to not make his father mistakes of being an absolute ruler, absolute monarch. So he crafted a much more subtle form of political mask wearing. In many ways, he gave up formal legal power. He actually gave up. I will show you the details of this. He gave up much of his formal political power, but as I told you, he was a man who liked to throw the dice. He liked to gamble. In the end, he won, because what he lost in formal legal power, he gained in this tremendous informal personal authority. So the Principate was really a facade of republican government that masked despotism, a system of one-man rule in which Augustus would control the machinery of the republic through his personal auctoritas, through his personal authority. So the system that he comes up with is called the Principate, which is a very complex system. He leaves the institutions of the republic intact, but simply dominates them informally through his own informal personal authority. Okay, so again, the government that, the system that Octavius founded was a system in which he was technically only first citizen rather than emperor. But in reality, he was emperor and autocrat, and it was a delicate balance between the old and the new. He learned the lessons from Caesar, and he learned that he had to preserve the facade or appearance of republicanism. So in fact, Augustus preserves all the institutions of the republic, actually increases the authority of the Senate over the people's assemblies, but the vast powers and prestige that Augustus heaps upon the Senate, the way he plays lip service to the Senate, was merely a facade. In reality, Augustus would be an absolute dictator, but a good, benevolent dictator, genuinely concerned with the welfare of his people. And appropriately enough, he was very much concerned with the moral fabric of the republic and preferred to be called the father of his country. During the empire, the People's Assembly, the Senate, they continued to meet, they continued to elect magistrates, but he superimposed, built right on top of this a new structure on the remote Roman Republic. Okay, so the Augustan Principate, let's actually go see how this system emerges. The Augustan Principate was, again, a facade of Republican government, the appearance of Republican government. In reality, it was a dictatorship. It was something that was sort of improvised. It was invented over time. And the people really didn't see how the true republic was being abolished and eroded. In fact, this was very popular with the people. They welcomed the return to tradition and the ways of the elders, and an end to this era of the violent civil wars and these powerful military generals. So as we said, in 43 BCE, Augustus was made consul. This was his first step in holding public office at age 19. After defeating Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium, he is elected sole consul. Okay, so he ruled as sole consul, which was unusual. Typically, you had a colleague, through the power given to him by the assembly, as was typical. Now, the next step in the forming of the Principate, okay, is a crucial step. So in 27 BCE, Augustus appeared before the Roman Senate and claimed that he essentially had done his job. He was ready to retire to private life. He was going to return to his estate, return to farming and his modest lifestyle. Augustus always cultivated the image that he was a simple man, that he wore simple homespun togas, he did not eat lavishly. This is all very important. So he was going to retire home, and the system would return entirely to the good old days, to the ways of the elders, to the old days of the Roman Republic and the Senate, the dominance of the Senate. But in fact, it was a trick. It was a device. So again, in 27 BCE, Augustus or Octavian appears before the Senate, says he's going to retire, give up all of his power, and never come back. But it was a careful ploy. The Senate protested and pleaded with him and showered him with honors and, above all, the title of Augustus. So I've sort of been sloppy in calling him Augustus before this because everybody calls him Augustus, that's his name. But technically before this, he is really Octavian, Caesar Octavian. He is lavished this title of Augustus by the Senate in 27 BCE. And this was a title which really meant a lot. It had a connotation of semi-divinity. It implied a sense of being venerable, a sense of reverence and respect. And this was very important because he was still very young. But typical of Octavian's way of playing politics, he sort of rejects this title, this notion of being Augustus, this semi-divine, venerable, respected ruler, and he very much preferred being called the more modest title of princeps. So princeps is a title which simply meant first citizen or elder statesman. It was just an honorific title that that statesmen were given, an honorable title for distinguished, experienced statesmen. So if you know, like sometimes today, ambassadors are called His or Her Excellency or something like that, or the Honorable Congressman so and so. This is princeps is like that, like the Honorable. So what he would do, he attempted to give up all of his power, but the Senate heaps power on him. They persuade him not to leave. Now let's look at the text briefly and see how this plays out. Look at the deeds of the divine Augustus. So here's exactly what I'm talking about. In my 6th and 7th consulships, after I had put an end to the civil war, having attained supreme power by universal consent, so he's talking about being sole consul here, I transferred the state from my own power to the control of the Roman Senate and the people. So he's saying he's giving up his power. For this service of mine, I received the title of Augustus by decree of the Senate, and the doorposts of my house were publicly decked with laurels. The civic crown was affixed over my doorway, and a gold shield was set up in the Julian Senate house, etc., which, as the inscription on the shield testified, the Roman Senate and people gave me in recognition of my valor, clemency, and devotion. Now, this is very important, what he means here, and I'm going to explain it. After that time, I excelled all in authority, but I possess no more power, and he means legal power, than the others who are my colleagues in each magistracy. So let me explain, actually unpack what he's saying here. So as I told you, Augustus ruled through a blend of auctoritas, which means personal authority, personal respect, personal influence that a person commands without the technical official authority to do so, and potestas. Okay, so this idea of personal informal influence without a technical official authority to do so, and technical legal power. So much of his informal power rested on his military command, by which I mean that even if the Senate withdrew his military command, the army would still follow him because they were loyal to him as the son of Caesar. So what I'm trying to tell you is that although he stepped down as consul, and this is exactly what he's talking about in the text, right? Number 34. Although he stepped down as consul, the titles of Augustus and Princeps have nothing to do with legal power. It was merely a reflection of personal authority. But in fact, his personal authority, his informal influence was so strong that he didn't even need the legal republican titles at all. Being consul really didn't mean anything anymore. Okay, so you can see he is commanding authority, his personal authority, through these informal titles. And he takes this a step further when in 23 BCE, he actually handed over his power of decision-making back to the Senate and the people. He totally restores the Republic. He restores the power to the Roman people. He gives the Roman Senate back the power to appoint governors and whatnot. And unprompted, by their own volition, the Roman people, the Roman Senate, that is, gives him even more power. So after Augustus resigned as consul, they persuaded him to take this special proconsular imperium. It's the special, extra powerful, unlimited military command. And he should also take on the powers of the tribune. So once again, Augustus steps down as consul, he only now is ruling as princeps. He was, however, given the powers of the tribune. So Augustus has the right to introduce laws into the popular assembly. He has the right of veto and is given a special command over the army. So as I told you, this is a blend of a formal authority and an informal control of the machinery of the Roman Republic, right? So he has the authority to control the actual institutions of the Republic. He has the powers of tribune. But much of this is this informal control. All along, Octavian preferred the modest title of princeps. It was deliberately ambiguous what it actually meant. First statesman, first citizen, the honorific. It was also a question whether he was the princeps versus a princeps. And this was deliberately ambiguous, right? Although everybody knew Augustus was the princeps, he was still first among many. In other words, there were more everyday people that would also be given, known as princeps. So the princeps did not exercise official authority, but relied on the fatherly authority of past achievements. So as we told you, the Augustan Principate was established gradually over time. And finally, the capstone of all of this, which Augustus was most proud of, is what we see here. When I held my 13th consulship, the Senate in equestrian order, and the entire Roman people gave me the title of Father of the Country, and decreed that this title should be inscribed in the vestibule of my house, in the Julian Senate house, and the Augustan Forum on the pedestal of my chariot, which was set up in my honor by decree of the Senate. Okay, so he is given the title of Pater Patria, Father of his country. Father of his country. So again, in this culture that gave fathers such unlimited authority, that depended on the father to guard the family honor and prosperity, there was really no honor that could convey greater respect or greater influence. So again, to summarize, the Principate was a facade for absolute rule, for being a monarch, for being a dictator, but he did so by using a very benevolent, very innocuous title. He cultivated this modest public image of being princeps, first citizen of the Republic, but in reality he was a dictator that controlled the machinery of the Republic. Once again, to emphasize, henceforth, all descendants of Augustus will rule as dictator, as emperor, but the institutions, the assemblies of the Roman Republic continued to meet, continued to appoint magistrates. The Senate continued to meet. The Senate controlled the treasury, but the emperors really sort of superimposed themselves on top of this and controlled the old structure of the Roman Republic. Augustus would also be tremendously popular, tremendously venerated, because of the reforms and stability that he brought to Rome. As we've stressed in looking at Rome, so I've divided his reforms to make it easy into sort of four main categories. These reforms, the stability and peace that he brought to Rome, made him tremendously popular. He is sort of the #1 emperor in the eyes of the Romans. No future emperor would be able to measure up. And he brought prosperity and dramatically reduced immorality and corruption. So as we saw in Roman politics, the public is private and the private is public. Family and moral values really mattered. So largely in taking over, he is very much for a restoration of patria potestas in politics and in the family. So he actually strengthens the ways of the elders, returns the power to the Senate, at least in appearance, Okay, and this also is true in the actual family. Just as Augustus wanted to return politics to the traditional ways of the Roman Republic, he tried to revive old morality in private life that had been eroded with the influx of wealth under the new empire. So he did much of this through his personal example. Again, this is about the restoration of patria potestas on a real and symbolic level. The main problems that Rome faced was cultural decadence, so overindulgence, and a falling, a plummeting birth rate. It's widely said that during the civil wars, the Romans drifted away from the core values of honor, simplicity, and frugality. And there were greater divisions between rich and poor, and many rich patricians and new rich began to flaunt their wealth through conspicuous consumption. Instead of wearing homespun woolen togas, like those Augustus preferred, many Romans began wearing lavish silk togas. Women and men, too, began wearing lots of makeup, high heels, and elaborate hairstyles, and perfume to display their wealth and status. So adultery and a plummeting birth rate were in fact major problems. The declining birth rate affected Julius Caesar. He did not have an heir. And of course, this affected each and every family. Every male head of household needed a legitimate male heir to carry on his name. Now, many attributed this decline, plummeting birth rate, to the rising status of women in the late Republican period, to the popularity of the common law marriage called usus, in which women actually had more legal power, and to the popularity of concubinage rather than traditional marriage. Concubinage meant just sort of a long-term affair that was semi-permanent. So in this way, this is why I pointed out Cornelia to you. Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, was held up as an example of a virtuous, good old Roman mother. So as I'm saying, as you know, even today, family values is a trump card played by politicians all the time. And this is something that Augustus was very good at, and it is in fact genuine. He seemed to really believe this, or perhaps, or at least maybe he's very good at playing this part. So Augustus's mask as pater patria, father of his country, was crucial to his greater political program of restoring good old Roman values. He passed laws that strengthened male authority and made it the duty of every Roman citizen to produce large families, to produce morally upright citizens for the Republic, full of civic virtue and civic value. Again, in the late days of the Republic, as Romans turned their armies on each other and men and women killed each other, for instance, in the eras of Sulla's blacklist, as families turned against each other, in the late days of the Republic, there was widespread notion that Rome had forgotten the authority of the fathers and its basic founding moral values. So really, the role that Augustus played is that of a pater patria, an emperor father of his country, who treated their children, treated the people of Rome rather like children, in the tradition of fathers providing for their families. So let me go over Augustus's family reforms. There's a series of laws taken to encourage large families, to curb adultery, and to fix the plummeting birth rate. So there were actually legal restrictions on bachelors. Bachelors were penalized by no longer being able to hold public office. Bachelors were booted out of public office, and restrictions were taken against inheritance. So if you were a young man and did not marry, you could not inherit your father's estate. There were special adultery courts established to clamp down on what he viewed as the widespread adultery, and men were prosecuted as accomplices if they failed to turn in their wives for adultery. So this had been a law before, but he sort of clamps down on it. Adultery was made into a serious public crime. There were also a series of sumptuary laws, so laws restricting what one could wear in public, restricting wearing expensive materials like silks and jewels. There were other incentives to boost the birth rate. Mothers of 3. So women who had lots of children had certain legal benefits. If you had, as a woman, more than 3 children, you could actually control your own property. And there was also an effort to clamp down on prostitution. Okay, prostitution was regulated, and a legal loophole was closed, in which actually many patrician women, somewhat surprisingly, registered as prostitutes, which allowed them to consort freely with men. Of course, also in providing for family values, Augustus did this through his personal example. He led a simple life. He wore his homespun togas. He ate a relatively simple diet. And he also provided for a series of temples, new temples, and building projects. Okay, the next thing in Augustus's reforms, so it's clear, both in everyday life, in the actual family, and in politics at large, he is ruling as a sort of benevolent father figure. He will also begin the tradition of treating his citizens, in the tradition of fathers providing for his family, to a generous dole, to sort of welfare. So this will come in with the bread and circuses, with the free public entertainment, and actually the free handouts of bread at such occasions. Now, part and parcel of his restoration of the ways of the elders, his restoration of family values, was how he strengthened the authority of the Senate. Under Augustus, the Senate gained the power that they had lost during the Civil Wars, when it had essentially been ignored. Under his system, the Senate gained power, and the Senate's old powers to appoint magistrates, to appoint generals, were fully restored. He, however, reduced the numbers of the senators from 1,000 to 600, and opened the office fully to the non-Roman allies, and made morality the main qualification for serving in the Senate. Good moral men of good moral fabric were to be chosen for the Senate, not because of their background, and senators would not only serve for life, it would become hereditary through families. He also took steps to improve Roman municipal government, the city government. So he established a fire brigade, a police brigade, and divided Rome into municipal districts. That's pretty much it. So he does give back the Senate their old powers, and in this shaking up of the Senate, he's essentially trying to bring back to the Senate the old moral respect and authority that it had before, because it really had been shaken up, really negatively affected by the Civil Wars. So deaths in battle, the Sulla's blacklist, and also affected by the low rates of reproduction. So basically, he purged the Senate of sort of unreputable, dubious men, some of the men who had been put in by Sulla. He strengthened provincial administration. So this was part of his sharing power with the Senate, part of his idea of restoring the powers of the Senate. He kept half of the provinces under his direct control, and half of the provinces would be controlled by the Senate. So half of the provinces, the governors would be appointed by the senators. He kept control of the more volatile border regions. So in other words, the Senate controlled the appointments of governors in the areas that have been in Rome for a while, so areas like Spain or North Africa, but the newly conquered areas that were conquered under Augustus, he controlled directly. And of course, Egypt was swallowed up into the empire after the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra, a very important source of grain, additionally. So this is part of strengthening the Senate, giving it back its powers to appoint governors, but he kept half for himself. He also took steps to reform the army, okay? The army had to be brought under control. Further civil wars had to be prevented, right? We could not have again this situation of Marius and Sulla, the unlimited powers of this era of the popular generals. So under Augustus, the army was fully professionalized, meaning that they were paid. They were given plots of land for retirement. There was a system of pensions, and they took an oath of service for 20 years. Okay, so there's no half-time service now. The Romans need a full-time army. And the army soldiers and officers would take oaths of personal loyalty to Augustus. So this was an effort to avoid the situation that we had with Marius and Sulla of the army being loyal to their commanders, not the government. The legions, he also reformed how the legions were divided. So on the border provinces, legions would be stationed permanently to deal with threats. And he actually cuts back the size of the army, reducing it from 60 to 28 legions, simply because he believed it had gotten too large, it had become this huge force. And now that the Civil War was over, Rome needed to go back to the old ways, so you don't have a threat of another military dictator. Now, I'd like to look together at the deeds of the divine Augustus. As we said, Augustus was the son of divine Caesar, and it became a tradition that after Caesar, all of the subsequent rulers and emperors would be deified. So they would all be recognized as gods after their death. This deeds of the divine Augustus is sort of regarded as Augustus's autobiography. It's really his autobiography, and I think it's really important to read it. I mean, rather than me just telling you stuff, because you really get a flavor of his style of role. There's this idea of play acting, this wearing the mask of being a father figure. So if you read through it, he talks about his accomplishments. So here's the part about him taking the office of Augustus, the father of his people. Let's just read through some of them together. I waged many wars throughout the whole world by land and sea, both civil and foreign, and victorious I spared all citizens who sought pardon. So again, he rules in a tolerant way. He extends clemency to those to the foreign peoples that he conquered. Again, he stresses his modesty, right? So twice I celebrated ovations, 3 times curule triumph. A triumph was a military parade that commanders staged after winning a victory, and was acclaimed imperator 29 times. That's commander. When the Senate decreed additional triumphs to me, I declined them on 4 occasions. So once again, his modesty, his fairness. The dictatorship offered to me in the consulship of Marcus Marcellus and Lucius Aruntus by the people in the Senate, both in my absence, in my presence, I refused. Okay, so this was in the midst of the building up of the Principate. I refused. In the midst of a critical scarcity of grain, I did not decline the supervision of the grain supply, which I administered, which I so administered that within a few days I freed the whole people from imminent panic and danger by my expenditures and effort. The consulship, too, was offered to me at that time for an annual office for life, and I refused to accept. So again, the message here is that he refuses the office of dictator. He refuses the consulship. This is after he is ruling informally through the office of princeps. You will see the same message in the next part. So you can just go ahead and read that. Again, the Romans are so loyal to Augustus that they want to give him more honors, more powers. But he says, once again, after it was decreed that I should be elected sole guardian of the laws and morals with supreme authority, I refuse to accept any offer offered to me, which was contrary to the traditions of our ancestors, etc., etc. The measures which the Senate desired at that time be taken by me, I carried out by virtue of the powers of the tribune. In this power I 5 times voluntarily requested and was given a colleague by the Senate. So he doesn't want to take all of these offices. He just wants to be the good old guardian of the people. And the tribune, right? Okay, so here he's talking about how he is carrying out the will of his father. His father had declared that the people will be given some money from his estate. We will look at, in our next lecture, the importance of gladiatorial games. And I put this on the PowerPoint here. Augustus is very proud of the gladiator games that he stages, and really haven't talked about them yet. But gladiator games become increasingly important to Romans, increasingly as the system becomes less republican, less democratic. Not that it was particularly democratic in the first place, but increasingly as Roman politics becomes dominated. Increasingly as Roman government becomes dominated by this emperor father figure, it is often said that this entertainment in the Colosseum, in the arena, became a substitute for any sort of real power in the forum. So this is what we will look at. This is in the tradition of the ruler providing for his people, giving them handouts of bread and entertainment. So this sort of entertainment in the arena, these massive gladiator games, becoming a substitute for real political power. So the follow-up, this lecture is a little shorter, will be answering the question on the blog, which deals with the Augustus text here. Okay, thank you very much, and we will see you next time for the lecture on public entertainment.